Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War.
Point taken.
Hello, I'm Luke Hector and this is The Broken Meeple, a show devoted to board games and card games, and spoiler alert, yes, we are going into Pandemic Legacy Season 0. This is supplementary to my previous video where I talked in very, very basic terms about my experiences with this particular game, but it was so hard to talk about it without going into spoilers. Well, now we are, so this is when I can actually start opening up the game and just grabbing a bunch of stuff out. So we got rulebooks, used sticker sheets, this thing, which we'll definitely get onto later, and a bunch of cards. We weren't exactly that careful about putting the game away, but the main thing I wanted to grab was the board itself. So I mentioned about, the whole board not necessarily looking particularly like enticing or something. Well, I mean, it doesn't. It really doesn't. I mean, it is just a bunch of, horrible matted greys. It's not particularly interesting. Now, there's a photo on the screen. You'll be able to see exactly how our map looked, but for the most part, those of you will be aware that a lot of cities get contaminated and there's a lot of cover, like eyeballs over the various places, bug control centers and the works. Well, we had a bit of a problem with Europe. Europe ended up getting pretty contaminated. Leningrad, Warsaw, Prague, Paris, and East Berlin all ended up with contaminating in some respect. So Europe was kind of plague central. We didn't want to go anywhere near Russia. And we also contaminated a little bit of North America in one game. We couldn't really get around that. Australia and Japan came off pretty much scot-free, frankly, apart from just a lot of eyeballs in there. And even Africa wasn't too bad, except for Cairo. That was the first place to pop up as a contaminated city. So that was a little bit of an issue. But the weirdest thing with this game, Santiago got contaminated pretty much in the end game. We didn't care at that point. But other than that, there wasn't really that much wrong with South America. If you've played in our Pandemic Legacy games, we have a thing in Season 1 where South America got right royally...
John Spartan, you are fined 1 credit for a violation of the verbal morality statute.
And in Season 2, we made a big deal about making certain that South America became like the new central reservation. We made Sao Paulo practically invincible. Well, here, nothing much happened in South America. We kept it fairly scot-free, and then it just didn't really... It almost became non-existent. We didn't have to worry about it at all, which is a bit of a flip. But, yeah, we've got all the different rule stickers on here, and we've, got the different eyeballs everywhere. I mean, there was certainly a lot of eyeballs in Europe and Asia. I mean, we were heavy to dodge cover there, but we made a nice kind of central base in Istanbul and Baghdad with a couple of safe houses, which did a good job of being there, and obviously Washington was still a pretty solid base. So overall, the board basically just favored certain continents over others and certainly didn't like Europe. But I will explain specifics about this board with some of my spoiler points that I wanted to mention. So I said that, you had different character creation stuff that I really liked. Well, I did really like the character creation in this game. The idea that you use these passports and create effectively an allied, neutral, and Soviet alias for yourself. And then you customize them with stickers that you unlock during the game. So you'll be able to see on the screen the 3 that I had. So I got a Vicky Cartwright, who basically is a bloke with pigtails and glasses, the research assistant. And then you've got Dixie Norbus, because I was doing a throwback to Austin Powers, the spy who... better not say that, but you know what I mean, that particular movie. And that neutral character barely got used. I mean, it was actually a very useless character indeed, although the facial portrait looks a bit more like Dolores Umbridge. But still. And then the Soviet one, Viktor Mad Putin. I'm not the most imaginative when it comes to names, people. But yeah, Soviet cap. An eye patch, a pipe, a twirly moustache. It basically looks like a quintessential Bond villain. Although this character became very useful in the end game, and I'll let you know why later.
Finally, those capitalist pigs will pay for their crimes, eh? Hey, comrades, eh?
Remember what I mentioned about the components going wrong? Yeah. There are 6 things of cover, the cover mechanic, scratched out on here. And for ages, we were like, nothing's being revealed. Something doesn't make sense. And then we found out the Board Game Geek thread that existed saying that the component was duff, and so if they didn't scratch off properly, you had to look at that spoiler thread to find out what was actually there. So Vicky Cartwright was pretty much invincible for the entire game because A, I was able to dodge cover pretty well, and B, the component was a little messed up. So that was a little annoying. That should have been a factor. But in terms of what unlocks, so I mentioned that the stuff in between the objectives, like the stuff in between each month, didn't feel that impactful. And honestly, it didn't. I mean, a lot of these mission types kind of just rinsed and repeated themselves. I mean, you had, one mission, you get Bug Control Center in Asia. Okay, fine, we'll have that control center there. And then in the next month, you get another Bug Control Center. And then the next month, you get another Bug Control Center. And then the next month, you get another Bug Control Center. It's like crying out loud. And it just rinsed, repeated a lot of the, the bug missions, the infiltration missions, particularly in the later game where it's just constantly infiltration, and a lot of those identified target cities, particularly when you were trying to stop contaminated things. And part of the problem with that mechanic, I think, was the use of these teams. In some respects, the teams kind of worked. I like the idea of building one of these teams, having it go around the map and mopping up agents effectively, So, this was a cool little mechanic. The problem is, these dominated a lot of the missions, and to start with, it wasn't so bad. You had to make one, maybe two of these, and you had to just get them to a certain place. That was fine. What happened in the later part of the game, though, people, with this difficulty curve? Because there were times where you had to make about 3 teams, 4 teams in a single game. That is incredibly difficult, if not impossible. I mean, you have to discard 5 cards of the same affiliation, Soviet, neutral, allied, in order to make a team. This involves one player getting all the cards. And yes, in Pandemic, you do something similar with curing the diseases. The thing is, this particular version of Pandemic Legacy doesn't have a lot of ways for you to manipulate cards. One allied character becomes a research assistant for the share intel action. That's pretty cool. But that's about it. Other than that, there's not a lot of abilities you grab during the game that are effective at getting cards for this thing. And there's even restrictions, we'll get onto those in a minute, that make it even harder for you. So you basically are kind of trusting to Lady Luck a lot of the time, because yeah, you can go to a place without help and go to the exact city and transfer a card, but there's too much stuff to do on the board. You haven't got time to facilitate getting 2 people to meet in one location to transfer the exact city card. It's just not going to happen. You don't have as much freedom as you do in a normal Pandemic game to make that a thing. So eventually these teams became just a massive impossibility, particularly when you had to make allied teams. That was ridiculous. There was one mission, in fact, no, I think there's several missions, 2 or 3 at least, where we had to make 2 allied teams, right? And you had to get them both in the same location to do a particular mission, right? I said you need 5 cards per team, right? There are 14 allied cards in the entire player deck. That means in order to do 2 allied teams, you need 10 cards. With a certain restriction that comes into play pretty quickly, you need 6 per team. Then you need 12. 10 to 12 out of 14 cards, you're supposed to be able to get in, 1 or 2 players are supposed to be able to somehow acquire this and build before the end of the game. Good luck with that, because that pretty much just failed all the time. I mean, it was insane. Building multiple teams of different affiliations wasn't so bad, but it was still pretty tricky because you had to get multiple players kind of doing this when they're already going off doing other things. I mean, my Vicky Cartwright was essentially a research assistant for part of it, but eventually I gave her authorization code 424, a gunbrella, and a visa to Istanbul, and she basically just became a killing machine. She was going around mopping up agents like crazy and occasionally doing share intel, but I never used Vicky to make a team. I was using her to kill agents left, right, and center. She was an absolute killer. And, you had 1 or 2 players trying to get the cards, and Lady Luck of the Draw just made some of these missions incredibly difficult. I mean, how does the game expect you to get 10 out of 14 cards effectively to make the teams and still have time to get them to the location it needs to go? It just got pretty silly at that point. Another particular mission type that really didn't work was Pursuit. These, like running men. So you had a person that you were tracking, let's say in Sydney, for example, and then you put the token on Sydney, And then you had to get checkpoint tokens on the neighboring little branches in order to corner that token so that it was trapped and therefore you complete the mission. Now, this either is the easiest mission ever included in Pandemic Legacy, or it is impossible. It's one of the two. It's never really anything else. Because basically, in most cases, it will start off in a location that's only 2, maximum 3 branches off. And so what happens is that if you have any sense whatsoever, you will go for that objective first. Because every time an escalation card comes out, which bear in mind is going to be in the first 10 or so cards somewhere, it could be in the first 4 even, you know, on average. As soon as that happens, the pursuit token moves to a different location. Let's say I've got it on London here, right? So afterwards, if escalation happens, it moves to a location in the direction it needs to go. So let's say it needs to go to Paris, right? So suddenly you only had 3 branches in which to corner it, right? In Paris, it now has 4 extra branches to do, and in some cases 5, you know, it has a lot more connections. You have to discard a card of the affiliation of the branch that you're basically doing, of the city, next to where you're trying to corner up. You put up checkpoints, basically. But what happens is that you essentially gun for that mission at the start of the game, hopefully do it with your starting card before an escalation comes up. If you do it, the mission is done, and you've done it in literally the first round of player turns. Like, it's almost non-existent. But if one escalation comes up before you can finish it, it then becomes an absolute nightmare trying to finish it. Trying to get all the cards and go to different locations and do it, and it just feels like a waste of cards. And it's all based on whether you get an escalation early or not. I mean, I can't imagine you could complete it in any other way, you know, than doing it that way, unless people literally ignored the mission and just let it fail every game and concentrated on other stuff, which I can understand. But this mission wasn't interesting. It was just too much of a random, like, luckfest. Like, the game, by the first escalation, dictated whether the mission was worth doing or not worth doing. And most of the time, it just became super easy because we did it, like, ahead of time. But we had one game where it escalated, and then we couldn't finish it, and then it escalated again, and we just gave up on it. It just wasn't worth getting the cards for it. What other mechanics were there? I mean, the bug control centers, kind of boring. I mean, it's just identify a city and, oh look, now there's a control center there, but you've bugged it, so you get, you know, you put a team there, you bugged it, and now it will do something later. Again, not particularly interesting. It just felt very similar to the other ones. But oh my god, this mechanic, this unlock can go to hell. I did not like this mechanic at all. I hated this infiltration board. This is Pearl Compound, right? I mean, we ripped off all the stickers at the end, but we didn't go into the holding cells, which was a 50-50 choice decision by me that paid off. But I hated this mechanic. I mean, it had a ton of FAQ moments about how the security tokens and how the whole, you go in, but you bounce back to the city and all that stuff, how that worked. I mean, we were constantly asking questions about that. But it's a stupid thing where you basically go to a city, and then your pawn here goes into the first spot, and then through only 4 actions, boosted only by action tokens, you have to somehow have cards in your hand that match the security doors to go through the various rooms, like a little mini-map, and achieve a certain objective. Now, the way this board was designed, in certain missions, you basically had to commit every action of your turn, and then some, to be able to do it. Like, you could not physically do it as just part of a turn. You had to wait, get to the point, and then for your entire next turn, do nothing but this. That's already a little bit, like, constrictive in itself. But when you get into the Pearl Compound and you do the big infiltrations in here, I swear there are times where the only way you could possibly succeed at this is if you had a character doled up for infiltration, which I did. I mean, I had a Victor Mad Putin. I gave him infrared goggles so that he got extra action tokens when he did infiltration. But man, even with all of that, you still find yourself using every last possible action, including bonus ones, to succeed in those missions. If you didn't have the resource, if you didn't have the assets or whatever on your characters to do better with infiltration, I don't think the infiltration missions are even physically possible to do. You know, you can't do them in just 4 action tokens. You need the extra bits. You need these assets. So why have a mechanic that breaks if you haven't taken certain assets for it? And, you know, it just wasn't very fun to do. But the problem is, in the late game, it's in every goddamn month. You know, in like September, October, November, and December, you've got to go through this mechanic all the time, and I was getting sick and tired of it. It wasn't helped by the fact that the target city it ended up in happened to be Novosibirsk or whatever, right? A city which unfortunately ended up with 3 eyeballs and 2 contamination sticker thing on it, right? So the city that we have to go to constantly go inside and out of this particular compound was in a city in the middle of a heavily cover-filled area. And bear in mind, this is next to Europe, which has nothing but eyeballs and contaminated stickers all over the place. And the city itself is contaminated and full of cover, which we had to effectively eliminate with stickers, like points. But even then, it had infection cubes eventually. So the game was just made that much harder by random chance. We didn't know it was going to appear there. It just happened. You know, it could have happened, it could have appeared in Bangkok, which has no eyeballs, no infection, no nothing. And we would have been totally fine with that. But no, the game was just kind of by random luck made that much harder. And that soured me a little bit, but honestly, this was a dud. I didn't like this at all. I mean, you already have luck of the card draw to get the teams. Then you have luck of the card draw for these security doors, because you don't even know what they are at first. The only way you can find them out is to go into the various rooms. I mean, there's one event card that reveals some, but you have to go into the different rooms, and when you go next to a room, you unflip the tokens and it tells you what you need on the card. So you might need a Pacific Rim card, an Allied card, or the number 5, on here. But you don't know that until you go to the next room. So you could spend the whole term going into the compound, finding out that you don't have the cards for the security doors, and then you bounce out. And then what do? Do you just stand there in that city and wait for yourself to hopefully draw the right card? Or do you go off and do something else? But then if you do, who's going to come back in and fill your place? So even then, it's like Cthulhu has to smile on you in order to get through this particular compound. And in one mission, the last mission, you have to get to the laboratory, right? I worked out with all my extra tools, I could only just do it with the amount of action tokens I had. And even then, it came down to a 50-50 choice between the holding cells and the laboratory. We didn't know which one was which. I had to just guess that the laboratory would probably be the bottom right corner. Makes most sense. Went in there with a tunnel through the hatch and did the objective. We would have failed the entire mission had I got that 50-50 choice wrong. And I don't know, I don't like it when it ends up like that. So, the different unlocked missions weren't that big a deal for me. Story beats, not particularly interesting either. The debrief book gives you, I said, an illusion of choice. The illusion of choice in particular was the evaluations you had to do. So, what have you got? You've got an intelligence book here, and then you've got, where is it? Where is that rotten, where is it? Come on, I will find you. I will find him. Come on. You're in here somewhere. There you go. The personnel file. You have to fill out these evaluations at the end of certain games, like, in order for us to win, someone else must lose. Strongly disagree, agree, or whatever. And then you evaluate, and then you get a little bit of blurb, and then you get a restriction card. These felt like such a wasted illusion of choice. You felt like you were really changing, you want to feel like, oh god, this had really good branching paths, and it's not. This barely makes any difference. It just decides which restriction card you get. And oh my god, the restriction cards. They're ridiculous. They're really nerfing to the point where it made team missions damn near impossible because you needed 6 cards of that affiliation to do a team. And it's not like we did anything wrong. We literally just picked a multi-choice question for what is essentially a story beat. And it's not something you figure out. It's not like you go, oh, we definitely need to agree with this and disagree with this. No, it's just completely random. And it just made everything much harder. And if you go a different route, you just get more penalties. So why is this in there? It doesn't really make a difference what you do. You're just picking a random thing. Do you agree or disagree? Who the hell cares? There was another example of this later on in the game. When you have a choice to work with Sabik or not? We chose to work with Sabik because we figured, I am sick and tired of this CIA boss constantly evaluating us and giving us loads of restrictions. So it's like, okay, fine, we won't have her then. The game became a lot better after that. As soon as you work with Sabik, you don't have any restrictions. Oh way, that was so much better. I mean, I think if you work for the CIA, you still have those restrictions in place. I don't think we could have possibly got through November and December with those restrictions in place. I think the missions would have been just damn near impossible. You know, we managed to just about do it, and I mean by the skin of our teeth in December, because it came to a point where, again, identify a target city. And here's the biggest problem with that. You are basing your luck on the player deck, which means that if you are trying to rule out which particular cities it could be, right? You basically are hoping that you draw the cards out of the deck so that you eliminate the other choices. Well, what happens if the choices say Karachi and it's on the bottom of the deck? You will never know that is the case. And you can't do identified target mission, I think, in December, so it doesn't let you do it. So, you know, we got to a point where we had to decide between Jakarta and Khartoum as the final must put the team there. We had to choose between two. We didn't know which one it was. Jakarta was on the bottom of the deck, and Khartoum had not turned up either. So we literally 50-50'd it, and we got it right. So fantastic. But that was literally it. We 50-50'd it. Now, had we failed, you do get some different story beats for how the game ends, but they're not particularly interesting story beats, and for the most part it just tallies a high score, of which I think we got 825. I think that was our final score, which was just in the 800 category. So we technically did very, very well, but for all we know, that could have been just for blind luck in some situations, you know, certainly some skill in some areas, but then, you know, my character should have had more hindrances than she ended up with because of the duff component. And, you know, we were passing some of these missions as adequate as opposed to doing all the missions, but those ones that we did as adequate, we were doing it by doing the checkpoint ones and occasionally the infiltration one. Most of the time we kept failing the team missions because it just became damn near impossible to do them. And yet it's a repeated mission all the time. Now I've ranted a bit, but there were some good parts, and like I say, I gave the game a 6 out of 10. I thought it was above average. I still like the pandemic mechanics in general. They are still good mechanics, and they are here. I particularly like these passports and customizing your characters. We had very different characters and how they operated. It was fun to have the stickers to put on your passport photo to make them look insane, and, you know, we created some very cool combos with these characters. This was easily probably the highlight of the whole game. And I certainly, again, I like the pandemic mechanic in general, and it certainly made for some very tense moments at times. But I just wish that there was a bit more, like, branching paths. I wish there was better story elements that come out, because nothing in this game really felt like Season 1 and 2, did it? Season 1, you had the Coda virus appear with zombies or whatever, and it was like, oh my god, insane. And then later on, you had the character betrayal, remember? So that one had some major holy crap moments. This has none. No point. Nothing in between any of these months felt like an oh crap moment. It just felt like, oh, we just get another one of these centers. Oh, great, you know. Oh, look, there's a safe house there. And oh, look, another contaminated city there. And yeah, we track this guy down and we just got a story element. Okay, great. Oh, look, we'll do another one of these evaluations. Okay, which one do we want to pick? You know, it saps the life out of what was there. So, you know, and like I say, I know I've been talking mostly about bad stuff, because to be honest, the stuff that I like about this was mostly in the good section of the previous video, so that was kind of the way it was. But I had to talk about those bad bits specifically. Now, where does this sit with the previous Pandemic Legacy games? We talked about this afterwards, and I have a different opinion to the other three. Yeah, go figure. And you know, we all agree unanimously, Season 1 is the best Pandemic Legacy. There's no contest. It was the first to do it. It like really changed the sort of legacy style going forward. It took a game that was set in stone and nice. It kept it relatively streamlined, but threw in cool twists and all the different unlocks, and the fact that it had story beats, which, yeah, the story's not that immersive, but at least it created some holy hell moments, and it made it interesting that they had big impacts. Now, they believe, my friends, believe that this is their second favourite. Not for me. No. Pandemic Legacy Season 2, I preferred to this one. Yes, it had a few points near the end of the saga that were a bit like, kind of odd. But overall, I like the fact that Pandemic Legacy Season 2 did something very different. Like, you started off with a tiny little island, and then it unfolded into the world map, and you explored and discovered stuff at different rates. That was really cool. I really enjoyed that kind of open world style nature of it. And, you know, the other stuff that unlocked in it, again, there were some cool aspects to it. So Legacy Season 2 changed Legacy Season 1, but Season 0 just felt like a Season 1 rehash with less of the cool stuff and less of the effort that was in Season 1. So this one, as a 6 out of 10, is still my third favourite of the series. I think Pandemic Legacy Season 1 would probably have been a 9 out of 10. I think it was a really solid game. Certainly not #1 on Board Game Geek. Yeah, that was a load of rubbish, but, you know, at least that's kind of died now. But it's still up there, which doesn't make any sense. So Pandemic Legacy Season 2 would have probably been an 8 out of 10, maybe a 7 out of 10, but I don't know, I could have gone to an 8. It did sour a bit at the end, but I think most of it I enjoyed. And this one just kind of felt like a 6. You know, maybe you could argue it's a little lower or higher, but it's the third iteration. It really needed to knock it out of the park and do something different, and this one just wasn't really doing anything different. You know, it's like more of the same, but it looks worse and isn't as immersive, and the unlocks weren't as cool either. I mean, you know, most of the things that were cool were all to do with character creation and customization, which I know is a big part, so fair enough, but yeah, it didn't affect me as much as previous ones. So, you know, that's just my thoughts on the game, and, you know, some of you will disagree. You know, by all means, let me know in the comments what you thought. Now, of course, you're watching a spoiler video here, people, so there's going to be spoilers in the comments for all Pandemic Legacy games. You've been warned, but then you're here, so what does it matter? That's it from me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. And of course, check out other videos that I'm doing, including the Fractured Sky review, and soon I'll get onto the Moonraker videos, so that should be pretty cool. Hopefully you've enjoyed these two. I know I'm late to the party with Pandemic Legacy Season 0 reviews, but obviously I wanted to play the whole game and give my thoughts, so I just thought I'd throw in these two videos as a little bonus. So take care, and remember, regardless of whether your personal psych evaluation didn't go so well, it's still only a game, so take care, and bye for now.